A typical autumn evening. Jack, like every night recently, stepped out onto the balcony. He pulled a cigarette from the pack and took a deep drag. From inside, the muffled drone of the TV could be heard, and in the children's room his wife Sarah was putting their toddler to bed. The street below was drowning in twilight. The city was settling down, streetlights softly flooding the courtyards, transforming familiar shapes into blurred silhouettes. He glanced to the right again. That mysterious stranger, just like always, was standing on the neighboring balcony. A few meters and a metal railing separated them, but Jack had already memorized every detail of her silhouette. Over the past few weeks, she had become part of his evening ritual. They had discovered each other by chance initially. He had never seen her before, and the adjustment apartment had been vacant. But later, a connection had developed between them. It started with silent glances and short nods of greeting, and now, for several days in a row, they had been exchanging brief phrases. "You're struggling to quit too?" Jack finally mustered the courage to speak, evaluating Emma's light outfit in the dusk. "Not without some difficulty," she responded with a slight smile, taking a drag of her cigarette with her full lips and brushing back her tousled hair. This short exchange became the beginning of something new, and, as Jack then thought, innocent. Ordinary conversations about weather and daily life, seasoned with light jokes and discussions about neighborhood events. It all seemed harmless. But deep down he felt that sometimes, when he went out for an evening smoke and didn't find his neighbor here, he experienced disappointment. Why? It was around this time that Jack began to realize something wasn't right in his life. Sarah. Yes, she wasn't young anymore. 8 years of married life. She gave him a son. So much work with the little one. No time for herself anymore. But hadn't he loved her with all his heart before? And now? Habit, routine, home responsibilities. He strained his memory and couldn't recall the last time they had talked about anything beyond mundane household matters. Watched a movie together, went out to a restaurant, or spent time in nature. Where had all of that disappeared? It was as if each of them lived their own life in this enormous house. He at work, Sarah with a child. When Jack came home from work, he no longer found the energy for anything more than a quick dinner in front of the TV. Things were different with Emma. She was free, divorced, still quite attractive. He had caught her several times at the nearby gym, appreciating her feminine figure in tight leggings and the way she drew male attention with her workout poses. Living alone, renting an apartment next door, Jack didn't ask about her past, but he knew it had been painful. They didn't discuss it openly, but it was felt in her soft voice when she talked about coping with loneliness. Jack found it alluring. She didn't complain. Emma didn't ask for sympathy. Her confidence was mesmerizing, and what he had with Sarah now seemed like a scorched desert. Every evening after the baby finally fell asleep, Jack would wait for the moment to step out onto the balcony. Sometimes Emma would appear first. Sometimes he would. But she was always here. "How long have you been alone?" he asked one evening when they both stood lost in thought. This question went beyond the ordinary topics they usually discussed. "Nothing special. You know, loneliness is a strange thing. At some point you start getting used to it. It even becomes pleasant. You begin to enjoy it." Jack smiled, tilting his head back and releasing a cloud of smoke into the sky. "Don't you think this habit is one of the bad ones? Like this?" Jack pointed to the cigarette in his hand and flickered the ash downward. Emma looked at him, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "Yes, It's not the best habit, harmful. But if you remove all of them, our life becomes empty and bland. If you can't indulge yourself occasionally, then what's the point of it all? That evening, Jack returned to the apartment with a heavy feeling. He compared her words with what he felt about Sarah. Perhaps his family life was bland and habitual. 2 weeks passed, and during one of their evening meetings, Emma looked at Jack with a slight challenge in her eyes and proposed. "Jack, what if we change the scenery? Usually men see me in the clothes first, and then in nightgowns. With us, it's the opposite. You've never even seen me in regular attire, and in my nightgowns. If you notice, I choose carefully, but I want you to see me in everyday clothes. There is a great coffee shop near the gym downstairs. Shall we?" Jack hesitated. The proposal sounded so simple, yet so unusual. He first thought about his family, about Sarah, but for some reason he agreed. It turned out that leaving home wasn't so difficult. It turned out that spending a couple of hours with an interesting and attractive Emma in a cozy cafe was even pleasant. These meetings became regular. It started innocently, banal chatter about anything, even politics, but with each encounter, Jack felt himself being drawn deeper into this connection, where he was always welcomed, anticipated, and charged with passionate emotions. Emma also seemed to have a growing need for him. She became increasingly open and uninhibited. She luxuriated in Jack's attention, but still confidently maintained a certain distance between them, as if testing how she far willing to go in this acquaintance. One evening, returning from the coffee shop, Jack found his wife Sarah in the kitchen. Only a night light was on, and she sat hunched over a cup of cooling tea before her. He could hear her soft voice whisper as she spoke on the phone with a friend. Jack froze in the doorway, not wanting to be noticed. "Honey, I feel like we are drifting apart. He used to just go out on the balcony, and now he rushes out to the yard an hour after coming home. He comes in, and I'm already going to bed. I have no idea what he's doing out there. No, he doesn't smell of alcohol. How would I know? I'm just afraid I'm losing him." Sarah sat quietly, almost crying. Jack felt a sharp pain in his heart. Guilt washed over him, but alongside it came a contradiction. He knew he had to be rid, of course, but he couldn't rid himself of thoughts about Emma. One night, everything changed. Leaving the coffee shop instead of parting ways as before, Jack offered to walk Emma home. She was surprised, but nodded. They approached the intercom together. A quick beep, and suddenly they were in the elevator. Jack was afraid to look at Emma, and she remained aloof and silent. A whirlwind of thoughts was spinning in both their heads. The elevator doors opened. Emma stepped out and turned to Jack. "Thanks. I'm home now. I'll take it from here." She had barely finished her sentence when Jack stepped forward and embraced her, trying to kiss. But in the same moment, Emma pulled away, covering her face. No, stop! I don't want to be just a replacement, just entertainment for you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If you want to be with me, you must first sort out your life. You have a family, a child. Decide what's more important to you." Jack froze, feeling an internal coldness. He quickly turned and rushed down the stairs. Now he understood that what attracted him was not Emma herself, but the possibility of escaping from problems, from routine and monotony. Jack returned home as if intoxicated. What had he done? On one side was Sarah, their shared home, years of life together, their child. And on the other, the beautiful, charming Emma, her energy, her freedom. She represented the possibility of changing his life, something he had been longing for, but a decision needed to be made. Entering the apartment, he found Sarah sitting in the living room. Her face was contoured with despair. "Mike, I can't do this anymore," she said. "Let's talk. Don't you want to have a serious conversation?" Jack stood frozen, understanding that this was the end. They had long ceased to be truly together, and this conversation was inevitable. Sitting across from Sarah, he began to speak. About everything that had accumulated over the years, about feelings that had faded, about how they had become strangers. Sarah listened silently, occasionally nodding. In her eyes, he saw not just pain, but understanding. They both knew their marriage had long stopped bringing happiness. They discussed arrangements for their child, and by morning Jack had packed his bags. There was no point in prolonging. He had definitely decided that this chapter of his life was over. With relief, he sent a text to Emma, informing her that everything was finished, that he was ready to start a new life. The message was read, but no response came. His heart constricted with anxiety, and Jack went to her apartment. He ran up the stairs to the 6th floor and knocked, but the door never opened. Perhaps she wasn't home? He went down to the courtyard and sat on a withered bench. Suddenly he saw a car parked near the entrance. A man got out, walked to the passenger side, and opened the door. Emma emerged. She politely nodded to the man and immediately leaned into him, giving him a kiss. They stood half embracing, chatting like a long familiar couple. Jack froze. Something suddenly broke inside him. Now everything became clear. Emma had her own personal life all this time, where something also wasn't satisfactory, just like in his own. And just as he wasn't a temporary escape for her, she wasn't one for him either. She was a fugitive, just like him. A feeling of emptiness engulfed him as he drove to another district to this new rented apartment. Again alone on a balcony, listening to the sounds of a city falling asleep. But now completely alone and face to face with his thoughts. Everything around seems foreign. Jack mechanically raised his eyes to the neighboring balcony. It was empty.